Hello and welcome to Venture Best Spotlight, a podcast presented by Venture Best, the venture capital and emerging companies practice group here at Michael Best and Friedrich. We're your hosts, Evan Lonergan and Emily McGovern.
On this podcast, we will be featuring some of our amazing founder clients and network of venture capital managers, each of whom is inspiring instrumental change to the way the venture economy produces, invests, does business, and even defines a startup. Evan and I are excited to introduce you all to the chairs of the Venture Best Practice Group and our fearless leaders, Galen Mason and Shawn Stigler. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Evan.
All right, Galen, Shawn, to get us started, could you each give us a bit of background on how you came to be interested in supporting startup and emerging companies by practicing venture law?
Yeah, so my background, I'm from Wisconsin, went to University of Wisconsin. I'm an accountant by history and really had this great opportunity to work with a bunch of entrepreneurs when I was at Arthur Andersen and loved that entrepreneur side of things, liked the accounting side less, little less fun. No offense to our accounting tax colleagues, but not quite my jam. And so did that, and then had the opportunity to move out to Boulder, Colorado in 2000. And I'm really smart. I'm basically a genius. And I knew shortly thereafter is when Techstars and Foundry and Rocky Ventures and all that stuff was just going to explode in Colorado. And so, totally kidding, super lucky, dumb luck on my part. But so really was fortunate to be in Colorado right as our ecosystem was leveling up. And so I started a firm called Modus Law with some colleagues of ours, and yeah, really had the privilege of working with hundreds, if not thousands, of startups during that window. And then about 5 years ago was even more privileged and fortunate to get to merge that group into Michael Best, and with Galen and Melissa and Greg and a bunch of the other OG venture team here, really just continue what they've built and hopefully grow it and continue growing it to the next level. So, Galen.
Thank you, Shawn. Yeah, a lot like Shawn. Yeah, a lot like Shawn. I would say curiosity and natural interest, and then a series of sort of misdirected decisions. Like I always, no one ever told me when I was young, like it was sort of, pick what you want to do and go do it. And I felt like I never got the advice, just start trying things, and life is more about a process of elimination. So I've always been in the Midwest. I grew up in Kansas City. Chicago was kind of my big city to move to after law school. I wanted to do big and exciting things. And I started working for big companies, and I just was not super passionate about it. And over the course of actually many years, found myself pining for something different and watched the entrepreneurial movement. I'm a big believer that the entrepreneurial genie is out of the bottle. It's not just on the coasts anymore, it's everywhere. And historically, that practice, at least someone that did, much more than dabble, much less make a full-time living of it, wasn't in the middle part of the country. And I think been a part of that really changing. Now there's, many of us in Chicago and Madison and Denver. It's really everywhere. And so all the decisions that I felt like I've made or tried to think through over the last 15 years of my life have been driven towards being around people that are pushing boundaries or trying to do big things. And for me, it's just innately more interesting. Like, I don't know how to explain it, right? Like, why do some people like hamburgers over chicken sandwiches, and others want to go biking versus swimming? When it comes to practicing law, I always felt like I never had a great enough idea to do my own thing, but I was so interested and curious about what drove people to build something and wanting to have not just an impact, but a really big impact. That this is the best way for me to do it, and where I was just happiest day to day as a lawyer.
Yeah, I think a lot of us feel the energy in venture law. It's very different, and it's kind of like a bug. You catch it and you don't really want to do anything else.
Yeah, we call it, Jordan and I use this, you guys will know this term, and we think about it now, I think more actively in hiring, but like, is this person nerdy for startup, right? Like, are they just like super curious about How do you form a company? Why do you do it that way? What issues are going to come up? How can you solve those issues? How can you solve those issues for $1,000 instead of $10,000? And so you can see it, right? Who's there to, who's going to go start a podcast to talk about to people, and not bill hours and all that. So for sure.
Yeah. So now each of you have fairly high profiles as attorneys in the venture space. So, tell us about how you built that profile over the course of a career.
Sure. Do you want to rotate the order, Galen, or you want me to?
Sure. I guess I dispute high profile. I mean, you just do. We're not. There are many lawyers with higher profiles than us, so I feel a little silly saying that. But thank you. For me, it's just. Startup law is hard. You do a lot of stuff you can't build. And so doing that for 15 years, it builds on itself and it just builds and it builds and it builds and it builds. And then you have a brand and people know you give a shit and people know that you know what you're talking about. And then you can add, I think a lot about people that are good advisors to me and how I can take those traits and apply them to what I'm doing. The term I use in that context is always meta. Right? Like it's one thing to have this contract provision, but why are we using this provision? And what's the other side going to do? You guys will talk about that at Michael Best. So there's that. I also years ago started a co-working space and was really fortunate to be at a firm and with some people that helped me do that. And we built that in a way that's, a longer story, but that allowed me to get to know a lot of like the then kind of most promising founders in Chicago. And that was really cool. I think I just got to meet a lot of people there, both entrepreneurs and then also fellow service providers who, every good venture ecosystem or startup ecosystem has people like us, lawyers, and there's many, people at different firms, and then there's accountants and outsourced CFO and web design and real estate. We all kind of come together to help provide the glide path for these companies at different points in time. And you get to know those folks and you meet them. And so again, whether you're intending to or not, you're putting your name out there. And then as you guys know, about a half a decade ago, I had the opportunity to launch the first non-founding service provider capital fund. And that's a small venture fund that, again, I've also been fortunate enough to have the firms I've worked at let me do this sort of side hustle. But that has taken me to just get to know even more service providers and even more entrepreneurs all throughout the Midwest, which is the fund myself and my co-managing director, Pat Cerrone, run. But then that also connects you to, Jody and Noah, who run the Rocky Mountain Fund, and Stefan and Phil, who run the Boston Fund, and Doug and Ned and Brian in Atlanta, and on, Lori and Ned in Texas. And you get to know then these other networks. So like anything in venture, it's very people business. And so if you're just in this space for a long time, you do a good job, you're smart, and you're like a nice person, you're just sort of floating on the entrepreneurial network of people growing their businesses and building relationships. I think it kind of happens naturally.
Totally.
Next time I'm going first. I feel like you took all my No, appreciate the question, Evan. Yeah, I think, and I do think I'm very high profile. I don't know if you heard about my earlier genius. Appreciate likewise. I think, it's a really good question. I mean, I think, we talked to Seth, Emily a couple of weeks ago, and his partner, Brad, wrote this great book, Startup Communities. And one of the big theses of that is this give first mentality of, you're going to give, you're going to help people, you're going to respond to the email, you're going to make a connection. And a lot of that isn't going to pay you back directly, but it's going to build a community where that's the mindset. And I think, especially like Galen was saying, those of us who didn't have the sort of intrinsic head start of the Valley or Boston or the city, it's like we had to hustle and work hard to build that. And so I think, unfortunately, part of it is just a time game. Like we talk about growing your tail here with our team where, you're going to go help someone, you're going to put your name out there, you're going to work with a baby startup, and it might be a year or two or three before that flywheel really gets going. But then all of a sudden it does, and you get to be our age. And I think if you keep doing the right things, it just happens. And then, now I think one of the great joys for Galen and I is to watch you guys step up, innovate, be entrepreneurial. You're your own voice, your own person. And I think that's a huge part of, frankly, what gets us out of bed in the morning now too. So our own little startup in the firm.
And that's
Absolutely.
a great thing about, as an associate, I'm sure Evan will agree, the mentorship and the expertise at the partner level at VentureBest is, in my opinion, unparalleled in the Midwest markets and some of the other markets that we operate in. And it's just great to be part of this team. All right, so Galen already highlighted his kind of personal founder experience. Shawn, could you give us some more detail on your founder experience with Modus Law, and then obviously Galen, if you have anything else on your perspective and that process of starting something from the ground up and getting it running, and
Sure.
how that has helped you in your venture practice too. Yeah, serving founders in a
Yeah.
similar capacity.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely one of the best experiences of my life. And again, just really fortunate timing. But I think, when we started that firm, I think our total overhead was like $900 a month. We split one office, subletted in like a little building. And so from the rawest of roots. And then I think the other thing that I always think back on was I'd saved enough money where I was like, I don't have to make any money for about 9 months. And so the logic was kind of that give first. We're not going to be transactional. We're not going to try and hustle and get dollars in the first day. It's like, we're going to just meet people, support people, be a resource, be a connector. And so I think both that side of it, and then as it grew, we created a website, we did SEO, we did branding, we figured out a 401k provider, we figured out different compensation models. And so it's so fun to be able to talk to clients, because you can just, and I'm sure you did this too, Gail, it's like, oh, talk about Gusto versus ADP, and it's like, oh yeah, that's what we're trying to figure out right now too. So you can really talk their language, or when do I have to switch from employees to, or independent contractors to employees, and how did you do that? When did you decide? And so I think there is a huge advantage or a huge benefit. I mean, other people have other advantages to just having gone through that, and having had months where you had to write checks the wrong direction. There wasn't any money coming out. You had to negotiate leases, all that stuff. So yeah, it was an awesome experience. I'm glad, frankly, to have the support of our bigger team and have some of the resources we have now, which I think if you think of most founders, they either go public or sell or merge eventually anyways, for the same reasons. They want to have a bigger impact, a bigger platform, bigger opportunities for their team. So even that decision too, I tell founders all the time, kind of what we looked at of when we joined Michael Best versus other firms that were reaching out to us at the time, what was important to us, what we valued, that process. So yeah, it was a invaluable experience, I think, from advising other founders, from everything from that little minutia to like, when is it time to sell? When is it time to merge? What are the variables you want to look at? So Galen in the back row.
Thank you, Shawn. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to that. I mean, I think one thing that was going through my head was like in law school, I actually really liked the beginning of law school. Like the later classes became very tedious, but the high level concept stuff, torts, property, I love that. It was ephemeral. It was almost like philosophical. And then when I got into practice, I was like, oh, this is like so boring. And so it became unboring, and I felt awake and alive and interested and invigorated and really curious when I was working with people that I could work with directly. So I am like adjacent to the dreamer, the visionary, the person that had something to do and needed your help. And then it was a big mission. It wasn't like I'm not to bag on, hey, I want to open a Subway or a car wash, which is really cool, but you don't need the horsepower of you know, really particularly tax planning or structure or control rights, or all of which maybe sounds sophisticated. It's really not once you kind of do it. So much of venture is, I think, you guys heard me say this, a good venture lawyer is a good teacher. It's not rocket science, right? It's a good teacher, and it's a good explainer of situational things. So just feeling awake doing that.
Yeah, and Galen, that's a perfect segue into the next question, which, stepping back from your individual practices, could you describe what you see as the venture best practice area? Its mix of investor and company side representation, and just the kind of clients we see come through the door.
So I should know this, like being on record here, I should actually have some stat and probably be more prepared for this question. I will tell you this. It definitely varies by lawyer, and I see this when I meet venture lawyers. There's people that tend to be more company side, and there's people that tend to be more investor side. I am more of a company side person, and that's just where I'm passionate, just in terms of my total client base. But you end up representing investors also, and then using those same skills to sort of make sure that their investment is safe and that they own the stock they think they own, and the company isn't a black hole to any obvious legal vet. Michael Best as a whole, or Venture Best, I would guess maybe 60-40, 70-30 or something, weighted a little bit more towards the company side.
That's right. Yeah.
That'd be my guess. There's just more companies than investors, so it sort of shakes out that way. One interesting note, I've always felt like some of the most technically proficient venture lawyers that I meet tend to be on the investor side, because they do more, they're at bat more.
Yeah.
They might not be as good at multitasking general counsel things or something. Well, I don't know. We should edit that out later, but yeah, I think if you're at bat over and over and over again, and if you're really investor side, you're doing a higher number of reps. Those lawyers can be really amazing technical lawyers,
especially in that lane. And I actually think that's one of our. I love the fact that we do both, because when you're representing a company, you can say, "Hey, I'm representing you, but here's what we're seeing from investors. Here's their pain points. Here's what they're focused on. Here's the terms that we've seen change in the last 3 months as interest rates rise." So the fact that you see both sides and we get a fair amount of reps on both sides, I think is a value to everyone. And again, you're always going to negotiate and advocate for your client, whether that's a company or a fund. But like what I always tell clients is, I'm always going to advocate for you unless you want me to do something illegal or unethical. But I'm also always going to tell you the truth and where things are. So that way you can make an informed decision. And if you don't get some crazy provision, it's like, well, yeah, that was a crazy provision. So, but no, and I think our team is really interesting. I think it's one of the theses of why our firm supports us and tolerates crazy Galen and Shawn is, we work with all these great companies and then they grow. Like I think about, one company in particular out of Colorado, great friends, 2 women started the company, it's up to over 100 employees now. And so, they started off just needing, like we call it 2 kids in a garage is kind of what we call it, help. But then it's incentive comp, employment, lease review, obviously multiple rounds of financings, all that. And so all of a sudden we're involving so many other people on our team, and we're so fortunate to have, Carrie Burns, Dan Borchard, all different great colleagues on that front. So yeah, I think being able to serve people with the whole platform is great. And then I would just say, to argue with Galen, because that's what I do on a day-to-day basis. Now, kidding, brother. I think the fun side is interesting and is different. And like I think, to our point earlier, one of the things we all love about what we do is like, they just started an AI breast cancer detection company. Like, how cool is that? I get to like support a little bit of something that's going to change the world, right? So the company side, you have that energy, and that's irreplaceable. But then the fun side, you have really good people trying to be the fuel for these companies. And especially like we do a lot of family office work, they're not just in it for the money, right? Maybe they're really trying to impact a community or a group of people, or they have a passion for improving health or longevity. And so having people who care about that and will invest not just for dollars and cents, but in people, that's actually become, as Galen, we all know, like a bigger part of my world. And it's a different excitement, but it's awesome too.
And could you both kind of expand upon the benefit of VentureBest having both investor and company side experience? That concept, that idea also extends to the company life cycle from incorporation to exit.
Yeah, we're seeing, Shawn in the back row is going to go first. It's an inside joke with me and Galen for calling on each other. The interesting thing about venture, maybe the dirty little secret, is very few companies, even in a good IPO market, go public. I don't know the exact stats. I probably should, but I'm sure it's less than 1%. Either merging or getting acquired or doing an acqui-hire, something along those lines. And so, frankly, especially with the companies we work with and getting in with companies early, you have to have that skill and that team, because we have a great team both within VentureBest and in our corporate team to help with those transitions. And we're seeing that, frankly, accelerate now in the market because follow-on rounds are not as easy as they were a year and a half ago. Valuations are coming down. Pref stacks are a mess. So companies are having to figure out other ways to have liquidity events. And I don't want to speak for Galen, but we are seeing a lot of M&A activity or combinations, things like that, because the fundraising environment isn't where it was a year ago. It's not terrible, but people are having to figure out other ways to have liquidity events or, frankly, to survive.
Look, I think it's just, your question was doing both investor side and company side.
I mean, Shawn just talked for like 10 minutes.
Yeah. No, I think that was super helpful. I think that was awesome. I don't have some magic answer. I mean, it's just like if you play offense and defense, you're better at each one because you have a sense of how the other side is thinking. So much of venture, though, on deals is like really pretty collaborative. If you're working with a firm that is like a good venture firm and they know what they're doing, it's okay, you got this, I got that. Okay, did you check this? It's like pretty compatico. But it's less so when you're working with a firm that doesn't understand venture or do a lot of that. And I've been that when I was a young attorney, so I get that. But again, like if you're representing a company, you'll come across stuff, and not a lot, where you're like, oh God, like mental note, like that's gonna have to go in the disclosure schedule next time, or I just hadn't thought that like the VCs wouldn't have a block over this action that we want to take, and God, they're not going to like that, right? So you'll think about that the next time you're an investor counsel. Like, hey, this came up, and I know it's not in the form docs, but like I've actually seen this come up, and I've thought about it, and it probably wasn't errant. So maybe we do this or we do that. So just by playing different roles, you get better at different things. Some industries, like whether you're a personal injury attorney versus corporate defense, they just don't mix. I've always thought the same theory applied. If you do both, you'd be good. But the parties are so averse to each other, you could never be on one side. You're Republican or Democrat or, wherever you stand. God forbid we don't mix. And so that just isn't really the case in the venture world. It's pretty collegial. Of course, there's times when it's not. But generally speaking, everyone's trying to build a company of increasing value.
Yeah, I think those kinds of experiences are great and certainly contributes to the institutional knowledge that's so beneficial here. And on that note, what would you say differentiates VentureBest from, another law firm that works with emerging companies or has a venture capital practice?
I could take a cut. Like, so for me, it's a few things. First of all, there's great people everywhere, and incredible benches everywhere. Our benches tend to be in places where there have never been long established, sophisticated venture counsel. So, and I think we all here have a passion for being like, dude, I'm from the Midwest. Like, I want people to build great companies here and have great counsel. Not to say that other firms can't and don't practice here. Um, but we're a member of this community, and I think we're all kind of into that. And I think we're all also into um, we're building a brand. We haven't inherited one or been handed one or anything like that. And for me, that makes me feel a tad closer to the type of client I work with, a startup, and that's just cool. And then we're also, there's economics. Like we're not so big that our rates are crazy, and to get something done, it's 9 committees. But you guys have heard me say this. We're not so small that we're like, golly willikers, what's this 1202 thing, or how do I go figure that out, right? There's a critical mass of precedent and insight. Like, law, again, as you guys all know, law is best practiced in teams. Like you could do it solo, but there's so often where even if you're like, dude, can I gut check with this with you? Am I missing anything? And most of the time people be like, nope, you got it. You're thinking about it. Now you're just more confident. And it took no time at all, but you're able to share that behind the cloak of attorney-client privilege, and you're just better. Um, so in a place where there traditionally wasn't what we do, we're doing it together with a shared mission, and that's it. And then, of course, the answer that I think everyone would usually open with is the people, right? I mean, we're in a services business. Um, Despite how hard the legal business is, billing by the hour, and whether the hour is really worth what you just did or didn't do, sometimes it's worth a lot, sometimes it's not. It's this proxy, right? Is your hourly rate. It's a very hard business, but one of the great joys that I feel like I've learned as I've gotten not too old is it's a people business. Like I literally get to hang out with 50 to 100 different clients. And then I get to go inside my firm and hang out with you guys or hang out with people that I admire and respect. And, some of us aren't that funny and are kind of boring, and others are like just interesting people to talk to. And seeing them work is really cool. And being able to bring them to a problem and watch them do their thing, I love that. But that's not unique to Michael Best. I think that's every law firm.
Yeah, although I would say, first and foremost, we have best in our name. So clearly, we're the best. I think that's important. No, I think Galen touched on something which I think is really important is like, you are us, we are you. Like we are building, this brand just like you're building your company. And we function and think and operate much more like a startup than, no offense to IBM or General Motors or, whatever, but like a lot of our big law firms kind of have that, our big law firm competitors have that mindset. And Emily and Evan, I know you see it, like we'll do a Series A and we'll have three people, a senior person, maybe a junior person, and a paralegal, and that's it. We'll see our competitors, like I know we did one the other day where there's 37 people in the data room. It's like, how is that possible? Like, what are you doing? And so I think we have that lean, nimble, kind of startup mindset. But Emily, like I've watched you do it many times with clients where you're like, okay, they want to restructure this or repurchase this or reissue this tax issue, so you bring in, they parachute in a really good tax person. So again, we have all the horsepower, but we don't bludgeon it or overdo it. And then I think, Galen, I think there are great people at all the firms for sure. And we're fortunate to work in an industry where it is very collaborative. But one of the things I love about our firm is for good or for bad, we're kind of the quiet company. We have all these hyper competent technicians. I could rattle off 20 names and more off the top of my head, but we're just sort of low ego, high competence, get it done. And I think that is really cool. There's not a lot of chest pounders, blowhards. It's a lot of people who are really good at their craft, care about the outcomes, care about the people, but don't need to, be the center of attention all the time, other than me and Galen. Yeah.
I agree with that. Hey, another one too that occurred to me listening to you kind of overview, Shawn. And we run this careful balance of calling ourselves a lifestyle firm. I think in lawyer circles, that's like, oh, you're lazy. You're lazy people. And I think it's more, you guys, again, have heard me say this, like, if you want to work with the client, if you want the practice where you're like, oh, it's 5 o'clock, whistle blows, I'm out of here. You're not going to work with clients that are getting up and going places. You're just not. And so our chosen profession is going to require you to forgo some things that are pretty damn painful to forego. Late hours, overnights, missed dinners, things that like pull over time against your life. But I think our philosophy here is you can actually still have having as first class a practice as ever exists anywhere, including in places that are not, the coasts. But with a little bit on average across your career, across your average day to day, a little bit more manageable schedule, so you can make commitments to other people in your life, and you can still have a lucrative life. And also, there's some of us that me go through a phase in your life where I'm saving for a house, or I'm doing this, and I'm like, actually, I just want to go crazy and be really into work right now. That's fine too. And if you do that, our system should structure that. But I think a lot of firms, especially the bigger you get, don't have those gears. They're just like, process this. I've never understood that as an attorney. I go through phases in my life. And as you get older, you're really more driven by what your client needs are than your personal preference for your life. But you can still try and control those things. And I think younger generations, I'm 47, younger generations than me value that even more than I do. And I know I valued it more than the old guys and gals that I worked for who were like showing up just to show up on Saturdays. I think that's a differentiator for us.
Yeah, great point. I'm 31, so I can't relate to like the life cycle part, but I appreciate you sharing, Galen.
Right, totally. You're mostly on TikTok.
Totally.
All right. Well, I think a good question to round up on, which both of you have already previewed in your previous responses, but what do you each enjoy most about serving startup and emerging company clients?
Galen?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, being on someone's journey. It's like a sacred, to me, it's just like a sacred permission or allowance. They allow us to do that. It's unbelievable. And journeys that are, they're not all changing the world, but they're certainly, many of them are changing the world and building lives in terms of salaries and jobs and wealth creation. And then some of them are building products and things that are like making the world a better place. There's certainly some setbacks. But for me, again, that comes back to like I just cannot imagine doing anything else and having any joy in anything else.
No, it's pretty amazing. It's the good and the bad, like Galen was saying. I remember when some of the venture debt lenders were collapsing. I think a lot of us probably, but I spent the whole weekend on the phone with clients, and frankly, I don't know if I can say this, but several of them, I was like, I can lend you money on Monday for payroll, and like you have that relationship with people, and those bonds, and then to see them, and not all of them, get to the outcome they want, but to see them build their dream, to be a little part of that, it is addictive. I mean, I don't, I'm not a drug addict or anything, but I imagine that's what it feels like. So yeah, I think that part is just so amazing. And then I think, like Alan said, not all of our clients change the world, but man, a lot of them do. I was looking at, yesterday was World Mental Health Day, and I was just like clicking through just a handful of our clients that are in that space. And it's like from couples therapy to like healthcare provider, mental health to self-care. Like we have so many clients just in that space. It's such an important issue. You have clean tech, you have all sorts of medical companies. So it's pretty awesome if you just take a minute and reflect the people we get to work with. It's bonkers. And then, you didn't ask, Emily, but you guys, like, I think if you knew the amount of time Galen and I and Jordan, Michelle, like spend thinking about how to support this market or this team or, this project you guys are doing and like how cool we think it is. I think that part is just awesome too. And we're not taking credit for it. Just being a little part of your guys' growth and success is awesome. So
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both for your mentorship and for being on the podcast today. Yeah, this should be a good episode, round up with some of our other episodes that we have coming in this first season. Words like transformational impact will be thrown about. So right in line with what you're saying, some of our clients are literally changing the world, and all of our clients are doing something just fascinating. And just, yeah, it's an honor to serve them in our lawyer capacity.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to this episode of Venture Best Spotlight.
Please make sure to subscribe for our upcoming episodes featuring our network of amazing innovators.